Okay, Senator, whenever you're ready.
Hey, everybody. I'm going to be very brief in my presentation because I want to take your questions and we're tight on time because of votes. Extremely happy that the NDAA is likely to pass today, the single biggest thing I work on all year. This defense bill has a lot of really, really great things in it for our military, their families, for military construction in Virginia, for important defense priorities around the world, ship and sub-building, and in particular, the provision that Todd Young and I have to repeal the Iraq war authorizations from 1991 and 2002 are truly historic since we haven't repealed war authorizations in more than 50 years. I've been working on this effort of Congress reclaiming war power since I came here in 2013. More and more people are very focused on war powers issues today than they were when I arrived, when nobody seemed interested in it. They're interested now, and whether it's repealing war authorizations or really challenging the Trump administration around the authorization for the military actions in the Caribbean and Pacific and potentially against Venezuela, this issue is getting more and more important. And I view the repeal of the Iraq war authorization as the first step in what need to be more steps for Congress to reclaim its power over the declaration of war and, frankly, the termination of war powers resolutions. We introduced today a bill, a couple of bills actually in the last 10 days or so, dealing with our minors, trying to make sure that the process to establish a claim for black lung benefits is made more straightforward and simple. This continues a long track record I've had here of trying to shore up and rescue the miners' pension program, the miners' retiree health program, and then the black lung benefits themselves to make sure that the benefit fund is fully funded or amply funded. The bill that we've introduced this week is not about the funding, but it's about how you establish a claim for black lung benefits, trying to make it easier on minors. It's too complicated, and we want to make it easier. And with that, I'm glad to now open it up and take your questions. It's been a busy morning. I had an Armed Services Committee hearing in classified where I viewed the video of the second strike that was taken to kill struggling survivors of the shipwreck on September 2. Because it was classified, I can't say much about it, but I guess what I can say is this. I can't watch that video and hear America say this is okay, and then say it would have been wrong, for example, for the North Vietnamese to kill John McCain rather than, capture him when his plane was shot down. I can't watch this video and have Americans, military officials, tell me that it's okay, and then criticize if U.S. sailors ever were hit in the Red Sea by the Houthis and were clinging to wreckage and the Houthis decided to kill them. There's no meaningful distinction. We shouldn't be targeting the survivors of shipwreck. I think the laws of war are against it. And I walked into the meeting seriously concerned, and nothing that I saw in that meeting allayed my concerns. One point, though, that did become manifest in that classified hearing that's not classified is the date of the strike, the first strike, September 2nd, which killed 9, and then the follow-on strike that killed the 2 survivors. Remember, this was not done pursuant to a congressional war authorization. It was done pursuant to a secret presidential order that had not yet been even revealed to Congress, much less to the public. When you do a congressional war authorization, you're not only complying with the Constitution, but you're letting the world know if you're associated with ISIS or if you're part of a nation that is attacking the United States and you're part of their military, you are subject to the U.S. military killing you. One of the things you do with a congressional authorization is you let the world know who you define to be a combatant so they can adjust their behavior accordingly. Because the president's order without a congressional authorization was and remains secret, the legal rationale cannot be disclosed. The list of the groups that can be attacked has not been disclosed. The folks who we are killing in these waters using the U.S. military to kill them, they have not been put on notice. If you're connected to this group, you are subject to being killed. And that was very obvious in the video that we saw today of the first strike on September 2nd. You know, the legal rationale around these operations didn't get developed until after September 2nd. while Congress received notice of this attack on September 4th, Congress didn't receive anything about the mission until the 18th of September. So what that means is there's a secret order designated certain people or certain groups as combatants, and they don't know that they're being designated as combatants. And the U.S. military is taking action against them, even though they haven't been put on notice and given clear opportunity to adjust their behavior. This thing is so troubling. And I think the Pentagon wants it to go away. Secretary Hegseth was on Fox News and other media outlets the day after the strike on September 2nd, showing the portions of the video he wanted us to see so he could brag about what a tough guy he is. So he could paint the case of here's what America's doing. But he didn't show the full video. He explicitly chose not to, even though he was aware that there were survivors that were killed. He has not shown that, and he has refused to show it, and he's still refusing to show it. I got access to it today. What's today? The 17th, 18th of December? This happened on September 2nd. Members of Congress only became aware of it on November 28th. Most senators still haven't seen it because the Pentagon is reluctant to let senators see it, even in a classified setting. Once you have put this out for the world to see and brag about it, the whole thing needs to come out so the public can see it and make their own call. With that, I'm glad to take questions.
All right. As the senator said, we are very short on time, so reporters, please try to stick to one question and keep it brief. With that, we'll go to Mark from CBS 19.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Senator. With a group of Republicans in the House forcing a vote on extending healthcare tax credits, one, how do you feel about that? Do you expect the House to take up that measure? And is there any path for the Senate to vote on extending those subsidies before premiums rise next year?
There has been no interest in the real interest in the Senate in a meaningful way by Republicans on extending the tax credit subsidies. Now, that said, we did get 4 Republican votes last week when the Democrats tried to do it. So there are 4 who have said, yes, we want to vote to extend the subsidies. We need more than that. It's a 60 vote threshold. We have 47 Democrats. We're all supportive. We need at least 13 Republicans. And thus far, we have not seen a willingness to do it. I will say this. I'm happy with the House action. And if the House were to pass and send over to the Senate a bill to extend the subsidies, that would put a lot of pressure on the Senate to act favorably. So I'm really glad to see that. I hope that it happens. I think that would be the most effective pressure point. There's a possibility of the Senate Republicans congealing around some proposal to extend the tax credits. I've been in those discussions because we put a proposal on the table on the 18th of September on the Democratic side, and we've been waiting to see if there were Republicans who would work with us. 4 say yes, 4 is not enough. The House acting, I think, would create a dynamic where more Senate Republicans might join.
Next, we'll go to Brendan from WTKR.
Hi, Senator.
Hey, Brendan.
What are your thoughts on President Trump ordering a blockade around oil tankers in Venezuela, especially, in light of local personnel being in that region?
Well, my sense is this: a blockade is preferable to unilateral military action to kill people who aren't even aware that they've been designated as combatants. I have very strong war powers knowledge and opinions that are pretty well grounded in legal research about the legality of military strikes. Seizures of tankers is not an area of my legal expertise. So I've asked my team to prepare a material for me so I can judge them. But as between seizing tankers, particularly tankers that have already been sanctioned, well, the first seizure that was announced was of a tanker that had been sanctioned, and thus, pursuant to a court order, my understanding was it was subject to seizure. But I'm getting briefed on full legal ramifications of seizures as opposed to kinetic military strikes to kill people.
Next, we'll go to Missy from The Atlantic.
Hey, Missy.
Missy, I can't hear you,
Yep,
but I...
Sorry. I just want to ask you about, Senator, about the right to repair clause, and just to get if you can sort of explain to us what happened about with the right to repair proposal, and it's been a big thing for Dan Driscoll, and the way that its supporters are describing it as industry pressure and lobbying getting this out of the bill. What's your position? What happened?
I strongly support the right to repair provision that was in the Senate version of the NDAA. And it's one of the things that got watered down or eliminated in the final version that I'm unhappy about. But I don't know who it was that insisted that it be removed. And I suspect that who knows the answer to that question is the Speaker's office.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
Next we'll go to Brianna from WVEC.
Hey, Brianna.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Good.
So kind of a two-part question here, and it goes back to the ACA tax credits.
Yeah.
So obviously they're going to expire at the end of the year, and it's not looking like any vote's going to happen before that holiday break. So can you kind of just talk about that, just about how they're going to expire and what people can expect? But for the second part of that, obviously, 4 House Republicans signed the petition this morning that's going to force a vote on a clean 3-year extension in the House next year. Obviously, this did not pass when it was brought to the Senate. So really, my question with that is how do you think that this would change anything at the level of the Senate?
The House passing it would be enormously impactful in the Senate because some of my Republican colleagues in the Senate say, why do anything if it's DOA in the House? And they use that as it may be a reason or it may be an excuse. But I hear that from Republicans. Why do anything to, vote to extend the tax credits if it's DOA in the House? If it passes the House, that means the Senate is the last vote needed to get this thing to the president's desk. And so the House passing this would have enormous impact among my Republican colleagues. Would it have sufficient impact? You're going to have to ask them, not me. But the number of Republicans who tell me they're reluctant to take this up because it's going nowhere in the House, so why bother, is significant. So I think the House action is important. People are really going to suffer. Look, the Dems have had a proposal on the table since the 18th of September on this to do a simple extension. We had a vote on it. We got 4 Republican votes. We haven't said it's a non-negotiable proposal, but thus far, the Republicans have not gelled around any proposal in the Senate dealing with the tax credits. They had a vote last week on a healthcare affordability package that had nothing to do with the tax credits. It was a little bit of this, a little bit of that, kind of a grab bag of ideas. Some tried, some completely untried, but they didn't speak directly to what 78% of Americans want, which is extend the tax credits. So people are likely to see their healthcare premiums go up dramatically in Virginia and elsewhere. And we've been telling Republicans, avoid this problem of your own making. You extended tax cuts for the wealthiest in late June. The tax cuts extended in the reconciliation bill just for the top 1% cost $1 trillion. You could have extended all of the ACA premium tax credits for 10 years for $350 billion, but you chose to help out the richest 1% while stiffing everyday folks with their healthcare premiums. That was a huge missed opportunity, a huge mistake. You can fix it. Thus far, there hasn't been the evidence to fix it. I have said to my Republican colleagues, if you want to fix it, here would be something that would show good faith. Do a unanimous consent on a bill to extend the open enrollment period and the current tax credits for 2 months till the end of February. If you think we can find a solution, but we're not going to find one by year end, then do that. That would at least show people some good faith. They haven't taken that up either, but I hope the House acts, and if it does, it'll put pressure on the Senate.
Next, we'll go to Randy from Telemundo.
Senador, buenas tardes.
Hola, Randy, ¿qué hay?
Senador, déjeme preguntarle sobre los últimos comentarios que hizo el presidente en cuanto a Venezuela, el tema del petróleo y tal, y en particular cuando dice que Estados Unidos tiene que, o sea, que Venezuela le debe terreno y bienes y petróleo a Estados Unidos. ¿A qué se refiere?
No estoy seguro. El mensaje de la Casa Blanca es bien confundido ahorita. Tenemos una guerra de 100 días. Es una guerra contra el narcotraficante. Es una guerra para cambiar el gobierno de Venezuela. Es una guerra a cobrar petróleo de Venezuela. No estamos seguros porque los oficiales de la administración de Trump están ofreciendo mensajes diferentes sobre qué es el punto de esta guerra. Especialmente después de la acción del presidente en ofreciendo un perdona a presidente Hernández de Honduras. Es difícil decir que este presidente está tratando a cortar narcotraficantes. Él está ofreciendo ayuda a criminales, narcotraficantes como Ross Ulbricht, el presidente Hernández y otros. Entonces es posible que, como dio el Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, eso es primeramente una guerra para cambiar el régimen en Venezuela, el gobierno de Maduro. Entonces la población está confundida y todavía en el Senado o en la Casa de Representantes no hemos tenido ningún hearing público, ningún. En el Comité de Fuerzas Armadas, el Comité de Inteligencia, el Comité de Relaciones Exteriores, no hemos tenido ningún hearing público sobre esta guerra. Y por eso mis votantes, mis ciudadanos, especialmente Virginians que tienen familias en las Fuerzas Armadas, tienen un montón de preguntas. ¿Qué estamos pasando? ¿Qué estamos haciendo?
Next, we'll go to Caroline from Roll Call.
Hi, Senator Kaine. Thank you so much for taking
Caroline.
the question.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask about your tweet yesterday regarding Senator Mark Kelly and the investigation into him,
Yes.
saying if they sort of continue with this FAFO. What exactly does that mean? And do Democrats have a plan to sort of respond to the investigation into Senator Kelly that you guys are working on?
Kelly has a backbone and a moral gravity that none of these guys can touch. And if they think going after him is going to work out well for them, they're sadly mistaken.
Next, we'll go to Caitlin from WRIT.
Hi there. Thanks, Senator, for the time. I wanted to ask, with the first anniversary of the Richmond January water crisis coming soon, are there any efforts to introduce any infrastructure upgrades or funding efforts for water at the federal level?
Every year we do an appropriations process that includes money for water infrastructure, and this year's no different. That those appropriations bills are among the bills that we still need to find an accord on between now and January 30. And I'm confident that we will, and there will be, all-purpose funding for these initiatives. And the funding tends to go to the state, and then the state allocates it. So it's more of a state law issue as to how the funds would be allocated. But I will say this. There's a second pot of funds that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed in 2021. That was an infrastructure bill that had funding and then a set of projects for 5 years. And funding included funding that was accessed by Richmond with respect to some of its water utility upgrades, both in wastewater and drinking water. I am working with colleagues in the Senate to make sure that the 5-year infrastructure bill does not terminate at the end of November in 2026. In my view, it would be a big mistake to let those revenue sources dry up. Instead, we should continue them so that we continue to provide enhanced funding to communities like Richmond and states like Virginia for, water treatment upgrades.
Next, we'll go to Corinne with the New York Times.
Hi, Senator Kaine.
Hey, Corinne.
I was just wondering, I understand that you were the force behind the provisions in the Senate NDAA that dealt with trying to restrict the conditions in which military aircraft were able
Yes.
to traverse. That's obviously the backdrop to the consternation about how Sections 373 ended up in the joint bill. I
Yep.
was wondering if you could shed any light on what happened behind the scenes to
Yes.
things ended up in this place.
Yep. So I'll tell you what happened and where it is and what's likely to come next. So yes, we got very effective provisions, in my view, in the NDAA to deconflict operations of military and civilian aircraft because of this horrific crash around DCA. And we viewed the provisions that we got as very solid provisions, although I will say to Karen, they weren't what I would call complete because the NTSB report is not going to be out till late January. So we put in the things that we thought were rock solid and would likely be in the NTSB report. But we also acknowledge that until that report is out, we can't say that we're done. And so we want to see that report. And then in next year's NDA or other legislation, carry forward on other recommendations that they might make. When the provision that we thought was a strong provision went into the conference, it was watered down. It wasn't watered down as bad as the status quo ante. So I want to make clear, it wasn't removed. It wasn't eliminated. We didn't go backwards to a worse place than we were a year ago, but they clearly watered the provision down. And my understanding was that was done at the request of the speaker. Now, when the speaker is requesting, sometimes it's requesting on behalf of the Pentagon or requesting on behalf of the White House. And I don't know exactly where this came from, but I'm assuming it was watered down at the speaker's request via requests from the Pentagon. But what I have communicated to the families and also to the NTSB is, you may not like this, and I don't either, but we're not going backward. It's still an advance over where we were a year ago. But the most important thing is this: to the NTSB, I've said, give us your best recommendations in the report that you will likely issue by the end of January. And then anything that hasn't been done that needs to be done, I've got a big group of senators, bipartisan, on the Armed Services and the Commerce Committee that are willing to go to bat to implement, probably through the NDA next year, but it also could be through a commerce-led bill. We will work to implement the NTSB recommendations to the extent that they're not yet done.
Next, we'll go to Emily from WBEC.
Hi there, Senator. My question brings us back to Virginia. I spoke to many vape shop owners who are upset about a recent law going into effect, namely limiting nicotine products that can be sold. While Juul and other prominent vape companies are on the list, they can be sold. Several independent suppliers are not. These shop owners told me that they're not going to last the month because the bulk of their sales come from independent suppliers and are afraid of, instead of health benefits, they say that this might create a monopoly. I know that this is part of a bigger conversation. This is just here in the state, but what would you say to these shop owners, and where do you stand on this growing issue of vaping and what we're putting into our bodies?
Well, my general position is I've worried about vape and e-cigarette products not being subject to the same rules that traditional cigarettes are. Now, I worked with Senator McConnell a few years ago to change the federal law about the appropriate age for selling these products from 18 to 21. And that applies traditional cigarettes, vapes by the big guys like Juul, independence applies to everybody. I'm not aware, to your question, exactly what the rule is that potentially affects independent operators differently than large operators. I'm not aware of that rule and whether it's a rule at the federal level or the state level. My own view is that these are dangerous products and they should be taxed and regulated in a manner that's similar to how cigarettes are. And I don't yet think that's the case, but the regulation should be uniform and shouldn't benefit large vaping companies over the small operators.
Next, we'll go to Nick from Inside Defense.
Hey, Nick.
Hey, Senator. Question for you on the Navy's FAXX fighter program.
Yep.
The NDAA approves about $74 million for the program, but the Senate's earlier version had more funding, had about $500 million.
Yep.
Can you talk through what went into the decision to scale down that funding, and also how is Congress thinking about the future of that program? Thanks.
You know, I was at the Reagan National Security Forum 2 weekends ago, and I went to a presentation about the FAAX, and I heard from folks like Admiral Caudill, the CNO, about the necessity of the platform. But I have to admit, I'm still a little bit in the dark about how the FAX and the F-47 and the investments we're making in each kind of phase in from a time standpoint. You know, so my understanding is F-47 is coming first and the FAX would be next. My gut tells me, without certainty on this, but my gut tells me that the decision to scale the dollars back on FAX was probably out of recognition that there were other air platforms that were nearer in time that needed to have higher levels of investment, and that higher level of investment for some of the other platforms probably came out of a program that is more for down the road.
Next, we'll go to Connor from Politico.
Hey, Senator, thanks for doing this. You know, Congress really hasn't seemed to have put it together on, you know, ways to push back on Trump. I know you're working on the tariff issue that hasn't gotten through both chambers. You're working on the war powers issue as well, but there's a lot of other stuff. NDAA, however, you know, it pushes back on reductions in Korea, Europe, repeals the war powers, forces them to share the boat strike videos.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, what do you think worked about this legislation that everyone is able to that these kind of provisions were able to get into law, assuming he signs the bill? What worked here when other stuff failed, I guess?
I think what works is we do a defense bill every year. So, and if you can convince half of your colleagues plus one in committee, something becomes part of the defense bill, unless it gets scrubbed out at the last minute by the speaker or someone else. But when you're doing a bill every year, you have the capacity to shape it. Most committees don't do authorizing bills every year. And so somebody's trying to push back on this or that issue, they find they're getting locked up in committee. Even if they get it through committee, they never get time on the floor. The defense bill is the go-to bill, not only for defense priorities, but other things that are sort of connected to defense, because you know it's going to go to the president every year. And so, we find, I'll give you an example. If I'm trying to convince Republicans to join me against presidential tariffs, I got to convince 4 Republicans on the floor to vote with me just to get it through the Senate. And that's not talking about the House. If in the Armed Services Committee, I have a priority that matters, I just have to convince 1 or 2 Republicans to vote with me on that priority. Then it goes in the bill. So knowing that the bill will pass it and go to the president's desk, and it's a hard bill for the president to veto because there's so much good in it with respect to things like military pay, et cetera. The regularity with which the Armed Services Committees do their authorizing bill gives you opportunities that you don't otherwise get. All right, that's all the time I've got right now.
Sounds great. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll send out a video shortly.